Right, huge welcome to Thomas Sheridan with Before Freedom. Researcher, artist, author and more, Thomas examines what the powers that be might have in store for humanity now that social engineering and propaganda have reached their current level of refinement. And by the powers that be, I don't mean your elected MPs, by the way. Our reality is being altered before us and for us, and most don't notice or won't believe it. Thomas tonight brings an awareness of this social emergency, and assistance can maybe expose this evil and loosen its grip on our and future generations. Thomas's website is all the W's, thomassheridanarts.com. Please welcome Thomas Sheridan.
Back here. And the last time I was here, I think it's around this time last year, I spoke about basically the history of monotheism, how from Zoroastrianism the idea of duality was created, a good and an evil, a good God and an evil God, and then you were put into a position where you had to choose a side. And from Zoroastrianism, there was mainly monotheism came out of that, which was the Abrahamic religions, the Jehovah God, the Yahweh God, and the idea of one God, one king, one emperor, one leader. That was the end of it. At the same time, there was other interesting aspects that came out of that, such as the Cathars, which I spoke about last time, and the Bogomils, and other groups that were more flexible in their understanding and eventually came to come to see that the God of the Old Testament, they believed was actually a psychopathic demon pretending to be God. And there's some interesting, shall we say, evidence regarding that. If you look at the Jehovah's Witnesses Bible, you will see that it deliberately mentions specifically that on the first page of Genesis that God created this, God created that. And then right before the creation of mankind, something appears out of the blue called Jehovah God. This thing jumps in called Jehovah God, no explanation of who Jehovah God is. And so groups like the Cathars and the Bogomils and the Gnostics believed that Jehovah or Yahweh was actually a demon, and the way they described it was a psychopathic kind of demon that was pretending to be God. Now, if you're religious or Christian or anything like that, please, I'm not here to bang any kind of drum in favor of anything. I'm not criticizing anything like that. You could believe what you believe, and I'm just here, presenting what I've discovered. But tonight, I called this talk Before Freedom. And I have to be honest with you, I thought last year, when I was here last year, I thought when I come back this year, I'd actually be more positive. I would actually trying to see things in a more positive light. And I have to be honest with you, I've actually gone darker in how I see things. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, because it's what I don't know if you know about me, but I've written 2 books on psychopathology. And my attitude is, if you know you're dealing with a psychopath, well, you know how to avoid them. And we're dealing with a psychopathic system that breeds a kind of infection that's damaging to the human psyche and has sort of rattled through history. Now, before I start, I'm going to be giving it up big time to royalty tonight. Please don't assume that I'm a Paddy who's come over here with a polemic, that I'm knocking your culture or anything like that. I don't like any royalty. I'm not an Irish Republican or anything like that. I'm here specifically out of the research into my most recent book, Valpurgis Night. And I just wanted to know why history went wrong. And a huge part of that would be a continuation on from this monotheistic one God. This is why I'm pretty close to an atheist at this point. However, I do believe that there are dark forces running this world, but I don't see them as a supernatural thing. I see them more as a damage, almost like a corruption of human consciousness. And that wisdom is the real issue, and I think the Enlightenment of the 1700s was never fully completed, mainly because, and I'll talk about this, it fell under the jurisdiction of royal families who had a vested interest in keeping their bloodlines going. And this is the main reason I have an issue with royalty. I don't care if it's British royalty, French royalty, Dutch, Norwegian, I don't care. My attitude is this is an archaic idea that does not belong in the modern world. And my main reason for this was I don't think it's healthy when people reduce their reproduction ideas to the level of livestock. Like, that's really, you see how, they talk about Kate Middleton, how she's a commoner. She's not a commoner. Diana wasn't a commoner either. This is just like these kind of ideas they throw out there. And I find it quite incredible how they, were told, and quite right because there's plenty of scientific evidence for this, that inbreeding causes cognitive decay over the centuries. Yet it doesn't apply to them. They're obsessed with bloodlines, they're obsessed with maintaining structures, and this is all very strange to me. I mean, I was thinking the other night, like the first time that, again, I'm not knocking the culture, the first time that Prince William had sex with Kate Middleton, when he said, "Who's your daddy?" that wasn't a rhetorical question. You have to know. And so, this to me is a very strange way these people live, and I think they still have far too much power in the world, and I'm going to talk through this tonight. Another thing I'm quite upset about, and I don't care who hears about this in this movement, is this growing anti-Semitism. I think it's unhealthy. I think it degrades, yes, Zionism is a problem, big time. I don't like Israel, what the state of Israel stands for, but we have to remember, we have to maintain our humanity all the time. We cannot fall into certain traps. And again, I have to stress again, I'm not telling we should hate these people I'm going to bring up tonight. We should understand what's wrong with it, avoid it, and hopefully develop as a better people. Now, I called this Before Freedom, and it sounds very grandiose. I'm coming here to say the world will rise up, and it's all going to be free. Well, I'm sorry, but I'm here to tell you we're all shagged. Honestly, it's really the way things are going with transhumanism, the growth of religious fanaticism in the Middle East and elsewhere. But freedom is not to go down that road, and not to be dragged down that road, and to rise above that, to rise above what's thrown at you. Just because transhumanism, just because religious sectarianism, just because the food has no nutritional value in it, and everything else, we avoid it. We avoid it, and I think that's the best we can do, is kind of be like the Gnostics, be like the Cathars, and pass on to the next generation. Look, we discovered this on our journey, and hopefully we can sort of create a snowball effect where I would say a group of survivors were inside the human race who hold the old knowledge inside us. And I think, whatever this thing is called, the truth movement or whatever, the alternative movement, we should really see ourselves as kind of like repositories of old knowledge, almost like we're the ones who are carrying it through for the others. Because it almost all fell apart and died before this movement started. It was like, we have such an enormous advantage because of the internet over our parents and over our grandparents, just because we had access to the internet, and that allowed us access to books that we didn't know about, obscure books and things like that, and obscure writers, and we could meet at places like this. So I'm hopeful for the future for anyone who wants it. I don't believe in victimhood as so much. My attitude is that you're either a victim or you're someone who's refusing to be hit anymore. And that's how I think we should apply our relationship with the control structure. So, as I said, I've written a recent book called Valpurgis Night Volume 1, and I'll talk about it a little bit later on. But it's an ongoing project. There'll be 3 other books in the works, maybe even more at this point. But I've been having to step back and sort of take almost an anthropological view of societies in the West and of people. And I was looking at the idea of a fracturing and a revolution. You often hear that in the United Kingdom they never had a revolution. it was never like a French Revolution. There was never like an overthrow of the government and the creation of a republic. However, there was a revolution here, but it didn't happen. And this has been another recurring theme for tonight, that revolution doesn't necessarily come with loud bangs. You know, it can be a very subtle and a cultural revolution. In 1956, the British government attempted, after Egypt had nationalised the Suez Canal, to invade Egypt along with France and Israel, in order to basically take back the Suez Canal. Now, it was described at the time in the House of Commons as an act of disastrous folly, whose tragic consequences we shall regret for all years. Yes, all of us will regret it, because it will have done irreparable damage and harm to our prestige and reputation of our country. We shall feel bound by every constitutional means at our disposal to oppose it. They weren't talking about the British people, they were talking about the British establishment, because something happened in 1956. Because of what they called the austerity years, or the stay-at-home generation, British people after World War II, the ones who were there at Dunkirk, the ones who were there in the Far East, the ones who were at D-Day, saw absolutely nothing to gain for it. I'm talking about the ordinary people who fought in the armies. When they came home, they got the NHS, and that was about it. Apart from that, they didn't see the spectacular growths in the economies that you had in places like the United States and Germany, the German miracle. And they were picking themselves, why isn't there a British miracle? We fought, we were supposed to have won, and this kind of thing was going on. When this happened, there was a huge backlash. Draft cards were returned back, National Service draft cards were returned back with bollocks and things like that written on them. We're not going. And this was a terrifying thing for the establishment in this country. It was the first time in the history of the really, that ordinary people had said no. And this was also culturally very pivotal as well, because this was before rock and roll. This was just on the point when things were socially changing. Young people were changing. Particularly the American idea of the teenager was starting to spill over into Europe. And people were just not going to go and die for a king or a queen like they were expected to in the past. There was a generation who said, forget about it. No. And also, there was a moral revulsion as well, in that people were better educated, was sitting at home saying, my grandfather fought at Dunkirk or whatever, and he came back as no money and 2 legs missing, and he had nothing to show for it. And why should we do it? So there was a growth, there was almost an exponential growth in cognitive, shall we say, processing among working class people in England. And that quotation there is really about that. What that guy is saying is like, oh shit, we're screwed. They're starting to wake up. And if you want to go back to a point in the 20th century where, I don't really like the term wake up, but where the British working class and middle classes began to wake up, it was the Suez Crisis, because they were not going to be suckered into a war where there was no benefit, because they saw their own parents did not gain from the sacrifices of World War II. And this is around the time they were really pushing the royal idea. There was the Queen was coronated and so on, and that even frightened them even more, because people were like, no, we want something more. It's not going to work anymore, sorry. So 1956 was a pivotal time. And it's just to give you an example of how a revolution can happen without bombs and guns and guillotines and so on. It can happen at almost the psychic level in a society, and they can just refuse by walking away. Now, we had the youth culture came along. You had the 60s, you had swing in London, you had the mod movement, you had the rock and roll movement, you had the teddy boy, the skinhead, the ska movement. And then in 1977, you had the punk rock movement at the time of the Queen's Jubilee. Now, this is how things had gone so bad for the establishment so quickly that the #1 record had a lyric called "She Ain't No Human Being" to rhyme with "God Save the Queen." Things had changed dramatically. You're talking about a seismic change in less than 2 decades that really, was convulsive and terrifying to the establishment. And I was looking at some of the parliamentary debates online from the UK government thing from this period, and these guys were shitting bricks. They were really terrified that they were going to lose control of the British society, mainly because they had no moral authority. And we'll talk about this later, but there's an infamous appearance by the Sex Pistols. I actually think it's an amazing thing, where they appeared on the kind of Bill Grundy show. And when you watch it now, you can't believe what you're seeing. You have these, at the time, they were portrayed as like animals, like the lowest of the low. In reality, they were aware that Bill Grundy was actually coming on sexually to a 16-year-old girl, Susie and the Banshees, and they knew what was going on inside the BBC. This is the height of the Savile years, the height of all the sex scandals, where basically BBC presenters were helping themselves to any young teenage girl that came in the door, and these guys knew this. And so if anyone had the moral authority, it was these young lads in the Sex Pistols. So it was almost like a psychic implosion was happening. And to even have that single there was shocking at the time. And the music was amazing. I mean, that was the music I grew up on, so I'm definitely prejudiced. This is my polemic here. But this is what I grew up on. And that changed my life too. I mean, I really had no interest in pop music until I heard the Sex Pistols and the energy and everything about it. And in the years since that, what they called the filth and the fury, that generation has been validated by what's come out about the BBC. And now we have to understand why. Why? Why did this happen? Why was there corruption? Because the human consciousness is a very interesting thing. You have 2 poles of cognitive functioning. You have your upper awareness, your 5-sense awareness, where you move in society and you deal with people and you go through life and you process experiences. But there's another one there. It's your lower, it's your under, like, I won't call it lower because it's actually in some ways higher. It's your lower poles of cognitive functioning. I'm just using this as this is the term that's used. And that's your social awareness, your instinctual awareness. There's some very good research came out recently about the left and right hemispheres of the brain. It came out 2 years ago. It was in Nature magazine, where they said the human brain is it's asymmetrical. And in that, like, one lateral hemisphere is actually a different shape than the other, when in reality it should be identical, like your hands, your eyes, and everything else. And they've now, the latest theory on that is, and it's a good one, is that one hemisphere, your right hemisphere, processes spatial awareness, what's going on around you. And the other one is immediate awareness, the left. And they reckon the reason for that is, in Paleolithic and Neolithic times, if a caveman was spearing a fish, he had to be aware there might be a bear or a saber-toothed tiger behind him. So, but that we have not lost that instinct. We are still aware when we're being sold a crock of shit. I'm sorry, but you know what I mean? There was that fantastic line in The Outlaw Josie Wales, "Don't piss down my back and tell me it's raining." There's a lot of truth to that. You just, all your life, you'll have had those experiences like, no, I'm not falling for this. But it happens on a social level. If you look at the work of Carl Jung and the idea of the collective unconscious, it happens at a social level too. And that's what happened in this country between 1956 and 1977. Now, onto these wonderful people. I live in a place in the west of Ireland called County Sligo. And there is a Gothic castle. It's a blood sports lodge on a mountain, in a very beautiful area called Classy-Bon. And it used to be the blood sports lodge of this guy. That's Lord Louis Mountbatten. That's not his real name. His real name is the incredibly English, His Serene Highness the Grand Duchy of Hesse, Prince Louis Francis Albert Victor Nicholas of Battenberg. The Germans, they're all Germans. All the royal families of Europe at this point are all Prussian or Bavarian, but they all go through the Prussians as well. Even the Hanoverians, it doesn't matter. What's left of them, they're all of German background. And I'm going to talk tonight about how deep this runs and how powerful this runs and how how sad it's become for us as a species, not people only living in, monarchies or, parliamentary monarchies, or what we call them, or republics. We're all affected by this garbage. They're still in power. They still have tremendous power. This guy here, again, I'm not attacking British culture. It's not your fault he got into power. I read this guy's 2 biographies of this guy, Lord Mountbatten. The IRA blew him up in 1979. They also killed a young boy locally and another man. It was an awful thing. This is Ireland during the Troubles, but I know a lot of people in that area, and they said there was all funny movements in the days leading up to it. As there always is in everything, from the John Lennon killing, there's always someone says something was not right before it happened. The usual thing. He was basically given a hero's death. So he died a martyr. This is a guy who, and I'm not pulling this out of my backside, you can check yourself. He was, when he was in charge, when he was when he was involved in the British Army, he was a big shot. He was basically creating suicide missions, sending British and Canadian troops to places like Calais, were heavily defended by the Germans, and were suicide missions. And it was just wanted. There was no military objective. It was just purely to kill people. And some of the stories are horrific of British troops and Canadian troops who were captured by the Gestapo and burnt alive on radiators on tanks and things like this. I mean, this is how dark it was. He didn't give a toss. He didn't care. Why should he? You're just cattle, okay? I got his medals there, okay? He was also involved in the partition of India. The original idea was Indian independence. Indian subcontinent is one thing. He was one of the things that wanted to split it up into Pakistan, Muslim states and Hindu states, and it caused enormous misery. One of the things that was put forward would be the creation of the Punjab as a kind of a neutral enclave, and that may have saved hundreds of thousands of lives. He wouldn't have it. He always made his mind up. And now, I bet none of you have heard this, and you can go check this online. He tried to overthrow the British government in the 1970s. He did not like Harold Wilson. He said Harold Wilson was a grubby little man, and the Labour government had to be taken out of power. And he was plotting to have a coup, I'm not kidding you, to overthrow, you can look up it, it's online, it's on everywhere, it's not hidden, overthrow a democratically elected British government around the 70s, again, because he didn't like the way British society was going, that they weren't worshipping people like him anymore. And it was only because he was told that technically it was treason that he didn't do it. But he was planning a coup of a democratically elected government because he didn't personally like them. I'm going to tell you, he wasn't a nice man. Well, it gets darker. There was a place in Belfast called the Kincora's Boys' Home, and it was discovered through the Irish and British police that teenage boys were being smuggled over the border as basically rent boys. They were going to his house, Classy-Bon, during the summer months. And there was a network of Orangemen and Freemasons. Again, I don't take sides in Ireland. I'm completely neutral. I have no time for either one of them. But it was all busted open, and it's there for anyone to explore. And it was all an elite, aristocratic little boys' ring, that they liked little boys. And he was knee-deep in it. And this is one of the conspiracies. I'm not going to say I believe this, but I've heard is that the Irish police were about to arrest him for having young boys. And that's one of the reasons it was all decided. We give him a hero's death. He's an old man now. If that's true, I don't know. That's one of the ideas out there. But again, who are these people? Who are they really? Who do they represent? Why this lack of compassion? Why these decades of cruelty? And why are they all Germans? You all know that the Queen's family is not Windsor. They changed, they changed their names in 1914 to sound more English. But they were all speaking German in Buckingham Palace. It sounded more British. Now, we never hear about Prussia. We never hear about this state in northern Germany that existed until about the 1870s. We don't hear much about it. We don't hear what this place was, where it came from, how it developed, and what its lasting influence on the world was. Prussia basically extended from the Baltic republics around where Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, those kinds of places, along the Baltic Sea, across northern Poland area, into northern Germany, and up a little bit into Denmark, and down south, not quite as far as Bavaria, but a good chunk, and then also a bit of Holland. So it just goes to show you, this was quite a huge geographic area in European terms. It probably was about the same size as modern United Germany, except it was flipped kind of sideways rather than north-south. But geographically, in terms of physical landmass, it wasn't small, it was huge. Now, Prussia was a different kind of Germany than the rest of the German states. At that time, up until, you'd be quite surprised, up until the creation of the German Empire under Bismarck, there was probably about 11 to 1,200 German countries in that area. Germans speak duchies, principalities, but a vast amount of them. And there was, Saxony, there's loads of them. There were Bavaria, and there's tons of small ones that were spread all across because of various conflicts in history, had spread across that area. Now, the Prussians, like the Germans, like when I was researching for Walpurgis Night, I came to be very sympathetic to the German people, because I see the German people have been changed. If you look at the Germans prior to what the Prussians changed with them, they were just like the Anglo-Saxons or the Celts or the Vikings. They were kind of a wild people, and they had a very rich, deep, magical culture. And that's not something you associate with Germans at all. The Prussian royal families and the Prussian aristocrats changed that. And they changed it in a way that is incredibly significant. I'll talk about it later, but they basically did it in terms of education and language. They were the first ones to understand that words actually have power. They actually have real power on human consciousness. Now, that's called magic. That's what magic really is. My will imposed on you, and you conforming with my will. That's all magic is. I don't have to go spell you, I don't have to wear a funny hat. But if I can convince you that I'm right and you're wrong, that's magic, that's all it is, okay? But that also works at a social level. Now, that's Prussia. And that is a country that has left such a mark on history, and yet no one really knows about it. Even to this day, Prussia is a land that's its culture and its ethos and its social and its administrative structures control basically the European Union. European Union operates really under Prussian aristocratic models. In fact, and when Adolf Hitler and the National Socialists got into power, they, after all this platform of government they said they'd introduce, which they did, Hitler, after a couple of weeks, then basically said, it's okay, it's going to be fine, we're going to run it along Prussian aristocratic lines. So the Prussian aristocrats remained in power even when the National Socialists were in power. And one of the reasons that becomes very apparent is the assassinations on Adolf Hitler towards the end of his reign, because they were all organised by Prussian aristocrats who were worried that the communists were going to take their castles off them. That's the only reason they got involved in it. They didn't care about German soldiers, freezing to death in the Eastern Front. They only did it because they wanted to look after their stuff. Now, I have a film that I'm making at the moment called From Prussia with Blood, to try and it'll be a more professional version of what's happening today. But Prussian aristocratic legal rights, nearly up until the 20th century, they had the right of corporal punishment, and this is an actual etching describing showing legally what the Prussian aristocrat can do. And you see he's whipping a guy, and he can kill him, no problem, he can kill him, get away with it. Because he's not considered, ordinary Prussian was not considered any more important than a farm animal. In fact, he's lower than the dog. See how the dog is? The dog's no problem. This poor bastard here is being about to be whipped to death. And this was what it was like, ferocious cruelty. The Prussians took the German peasantry, the Prussian peasantry, and they literally put them through a kind of a trauma-based mind control program on a massive level. If you know anything about like military or secret services, mind control programs, they're based on trauma. That's, what's happening. They're traumatizing people. That's it. You can change a person into something called a dissociative identity disorder, which what literally does is, you're so horrified by what's being done to you, you create a partition in your brain where you escape. And then through the trauma, they put you in that partition in your brain. And what they do is they seek later on to open you back up again, so they can put ideas. It's almost like a stored piece of software in your brain. This is what happens to Hans Sirhan, when the guy who shot Robert Kennedy. He had spent time in a psychiatric place, and they had done the MK Ultra thing had been done on him and other people, and then he was given the order out of the blue, and he had no idea why he did what he did. So they were doing it to a nation. And where did this come from? Where is this lack of decency? What makes aristocrats believe they can do this? Where they're human beings just like us. There is an element of, monotheism, like I was here last time I spoke about monotheism, that the divine right of kings. But what does that mean really? What makes them believe they're more godlike? Okay. Now we're getting into kind of spooky stuff, but this is important stuff. Where did Prussia come from? Prussia came from a military religious order called the Teutonic Knights, who were established in the Middle East during the Crusades to fight the Muslims. And they still exist to this day. They're still around. And like the Crusaders, like all the Templars and all the other ones, they became incredibly powerful and incredibly rich, but they also became infused with the culture of the region. In fact, there's almost a thing like you will destroy, the idea of you will destroy what you become, you destroy. I think it was Carl Jung who said, be careful not to spend too much time looking into hell, or you will find hell looking back at you. Well, these people, just like the Templars had this, stories of the Templars had discovered the idea of, they'd found these massive jewels under the temple and all these other stories. Again, this stuff is not really well known in the English-speaking world, and this is what I find so interesting, is that I'm not going to say it's true, but the Islamic spiritual tradition has this idea of a thing called the jinn. It's basically a demon or something that they call from smokeless fire, which suggests plasma or something like that. I'm not saying this is a demon, literally. I'm talking about a corruption of consciousness here. An infection, okay? And these guys, if you look at European royalty prior to this, you didn't really have the same idea of aristocrats being more godly than the people. In fact, in many instances, they fought alongside with their people. Harold at the Battle of Hastings, etc. All through history up until that point, often the king was on the field with the lads at the front. It doesn't matter if they were Anglo-Saxons, Saxons, Gaels, Picts, Vikings. He was nearly always there, and he was willing to die alongside them. That stopped when these guys came back from the Middle East, and you suddenly had very different kind of kingdoms established. What they did was basically bring this kind of infection of the consciousness that already existed in the Middle East through this Abrahamic idea, this which really spills out of Babylon. This idea of there's an elite class that are up here, and they're so different compared to what's down here. They're like gods. And in the Middle Eastern world, they'll often say those people are infected by the jinn. To them, the allegory, a metaphor they use will be a demon that's inside them. That's not a human being, that hates human beings, and they're infected. In fact, in my first book, Puzzling People, I show an example of a royal family in Oman I'm sorry, is it Oman? It's one of the Arab oil states in the Gulf where the actual royal family boasts about being descendants of the jinn. They don't hide it, they boast about it. And this is a wealthy Arab oil republic where something like 45% of the children are actually at starvation level. Even though they're fabulously wealthy with oil, they're all spending on palaces for themselves. And this is what these guys brought back from the Middle East. This infection. They brought it back. And when they landed in Europe, these guys basically they portrayed themselves as godly and kingly and noble and all. You know, we're the lads, you know, we're the one. But they were basically taking over countries like someone robbing land. And the people who lived there were just as much livestock as the animals that lived there. And here's Frederick the Great. I love that, the Great. See, this is when this all started. 1194 to 1250, invasion of Prussia and the consolidation of what I call the aristocratic infection. The Middle Eastern infection had come into Europe. And suddenly the aristocrats were very different than they had been. So it was in here now. Europe is different. And Prussia was where this all really started to consolidate. But it kept going, it kept showing up everywhere. And this is where the lack of compassion and lack of cruelty came out. This is like Prospero in The Masquerade of the Red Death, the Edgar Allan Poe play, short story, I'm sorry. This complete I don't care if the peasants are starving, I don't care. I'm a Tsar, I'm a king, I'm an emperor. We're the aristocrats. We go to different schools. We're just different and we inbreed. Why do we inbreed? Why are we so caught up in making sure we don't marry outside the bloodline to keep the infection going? Now, this stuff has led me down some amazing roads, and I'm not a big fan of the psychedelic stuff. I'll tell you why. It's often sold as something amazing, but they never tell you about the bad side of it, you know, and it can go horrifically wrong. There's bad psychedelic trips and there's good psychedelic trips. But you're rolling a dice, you know, that kind of thing. But there seems to be a growing assumption now that it's like, oh, it's just everyone should drink ayahuasca and we'll all be perfect and everything like that. I mean, that to me is just like a scary kind of idea they're putting into people's heads now, because it's too much like Huxley's Brave New World. And that we should, instead of like worrying about things or challenging the government or standing up for our rights and not paying our taxes, we should, you know, take some entheogens and just float off into magic land. And everything will be okay, because our governments will make sure that our best interests are served while we're off tripping. There's a lot of that going on now, and I don't like it. Okay, this guy here, this is an amazing story. There's almost like antibodies that appear now and again within this kind of Prussian, Romano, whatever you want to call it, Babylon bloodline. It shows up now and again. And I think Diana Spencer was one of them, where they're born with an innate decency and kindness that just radiates off them. It just radiates off them. There was a guy called Frederick II of Prussia, and he was born to Frederick I. His father was an authoritarian, hard-assed, you know, Prussian emperor, this kind of thing. And this guy was quite different. And this is a recurring theme that seems to happen in this history. You had an individual that came on later on called Caspar Hauser, who was just like this homeless child that appeared in the streets of Baden one day, and he claimed to be from the royal house of Baden, I think it was, yeah. And he showed up in Nuremberg on Walpurgis night, April 30, but that's a whole other story. No, he claimed to be born then, sorry. And he had the same effect. He was just this gentle child, a soul that radiated like this magical child. And Frederick II of Germany, Prussia, when he was born, he was different than the rest of them. He was artistic, he was liked, he was kind, And he was not really, though he was highly educated and he went to military schools and everything, he was not like the rest of them. He was almost like their freak, you know, that kind of a thing. Like a normal family has a psychopath born every so often. These have the other problem. Every so often someone normal is born. But this guy became involved in a gay relationship with a guy called Hans Hermann von Katte, who was like another aristocrat who was like a decent, I don't think he was like a major aristocrat. And the two of them had planned to run away to England in a kind of a lovers elope kind of thing. They weren't openly gay, but you know, you can tell us, you can kind of understand, you kind of get the idea what was happening. They were arrested, and the father, Frederick I, accused them of going to England to recruit money and troops off George III here to invade Prussia and begin a revolution. Because there was a big fear of revolutions at that time building up, leading towards the French Revolution, that there was growths in the Enlightenment was making more people educated, and so on. So what happened to this poor guy is the two guys, the father unfortunately he said, couldn't sentence his own son to death for being a nice guy. Under the tenets of the Holy Roman Empire, where a king can't kill the eldest son. So he had to deal with him. So he put him in the prison and forced him to watch von Katte's beheading. Now, isn't it funny that, like, all coming full circle, what we're bombarded with in the news lately? Okay? There's something about beheading that has a psychedelic effect. A bad one. It causes a kind of a fracturing of the cognitive processing, and it causes people to have a very strong, I know I can't watch those videos that when you see them showing up on Facebook and think, I can't watch them. I don't even like the photo, I don't even like thinking about it. But this is something they've known for a long time. This is why the Bourbons, and they had the executions in France during the Revolution, the guillotine was in public. And if you read some of the accounts of what happened during these executions, they were like rock concerts and people in the states of hysterics. They would run over and try to get the blood of the person that was killed because they believed that the blood of a person who had been decapitated had a magical power. And they would often be like in states of trance and euphoric states. It would trigger a psychedelic state. And I kind of see that when I observe on Facebook, there seems to be a fetish for posting all these beheading things. And you can almost see these people become fanboys of it. Why? And like, you've lost the run of yourself here. This is bizarre. Even if it's not real and ISIS are not real, this is just a very weird thing to be obsessed with. And so anyway, Frederick II had to witness this poor guy. You can see this is an actual contemporary drawing of the time. That's how it happened. And he's begging to us, oh, I miss you, I can't live without you, blah, 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 blah. Von Katte down there, he's decapitated in front of him. And then something really creepy happens. Frederick falls into a trance, a psychedelic trance, where this just shows up all through history. This leader, or this religious leader, who has a psychedelic experience and then comes out as somebody else. And this is what happened to him. And he during this descriptions of his psychedelic experience in the prison cell, he's talking about seeing the ghost of him, demons, all these kinds of things. And then he has other visions of what's going to happen with Germany in the future. And then when this guy comes out, it's almost like, again, trauma-based mind control thing. A completely new personality has been put inside Frederick II. And he's even more hardcore than his father. He's even more intense. And he becomes one of the most influential and powerful leaders in history, and yet so many of us in the English-speaking world have never heard of him. He began a revolution within Prussia that spread throughout Germany of everything from agriculture, new forms of military warfare, education, as I said, and many other things, diplomacy, industry, all as a result of this negative psychedelic experience he had. It was almost like he'd been corrected in their minds. He was back to being evil. you know. And it was. He won tremendous victories against the Austrians, and that were incredible military victories. And it changed the Prussian army. It changed even the Prussian military. Now, these people are dark. They don't behave like us. When we see royal pageants, we have to remind ourselves that they're not pageants, they're rituals. They're a ritual of a kind of a nobility cult. That's the way you have to look at them. They're rituals, okay? And I found this in a German book recently, and it's showing I think it's the Treaty of Malmo, a peace treaty that's celebrated by these intellectuals and aristocrats symbolically burying the body of a 71-year-old child. I mean, who comes up with this? You know, like, could you imagine, like, here at New Horizons, if you suddenly won an award, that's celebrated by having a little ritual where we bury a baby? Yeah, this is how they behave. And these are the people who rule us. This is how weird they are. This is how different they are than us. And yet this was in the height of the Enlightenment. This is around the 1840s, I think, 30s. The height of the Enlightenment, where everything was get rid of superstition, get rid of religion, get rid of, you know, all this nonsense. But let's symbolically bury a 9-year-old child, celebrate a treaty. This is what we're dealing with. These people are not like us. They're different. And if there's a 7-month-old baby inside that, I don't know. It's just weird shit no matter how you look at it. And this is the Prussians. This is how they were. It was the Prussian aristocrats now, not the Prussian people. The Prussian people were actually victims, and I'll get to that later. They were distorted, they were mad. They were crazy. And yeah, they laid the foundations of the European Union later on, as we'll see. And then you ask yourself, why is the world so crazy? Now, Frederick the Great, 1712 to 1786, he was an enlightened absolutism. Sorry, I've got a terrible cold. Basically, the Enlightenment is wrong. Science and reason is everything. We must strive for reason. We must strive for common sense and get rid of all the superstition. And as long as you do as the king tells you. So as the king was the ultimate authority of what reason was. What the king said was the truth. Now his family, this is the origin now of the British Royals as well. They emerged from Franconia. Franconia is kind of on the border of Upper Bavaria. This is where they came from. As I said, they founded the Kingdom of Prussia after basically origin is the Teutonic Knights who returned, I believe, from the Middle East with this kind of psychic infection. And they've infected, and I make no apology for using that term, all European royalty since, for the simple reason that they've been obsessed with inbreeding. Obsessed with it. Now, the Prussian military had been so badly treated, and you're talking about people who've been so downtrodden, and it's the regular Prussian people, who I showed you the photograph earlier on where the aristocrat could beat them to death if he felt like it, that in the Prussian army, at that time, as this period was developing, a Prussian infantryman was more likely to be murdered by a Prussian officer than he was by the enemy. That was, they were just killing, you know, oh, your battalion messed up, hang them all, this kind of thing. And this kind of dark cruelty kind of spread within the military orders there, and that's where you get the Hessian Guards. They were basically the Rothschild private army coming out of the princes of Frankfurt, again German, and the Hessian Guards had that same viciousness that was unheard of in the American Civil War, fighting on the side of the British. Even though they were German mercenaries, they weren't actually British, but they were fighting on the side of the British. They used the acts of cruelty towards the American prisoners were unheard of. They would kill everybody. They captured them. They were also heavily involved in the 1798 Irish Rebellion, and when the United Irishmen lost, and the British and the Hessians won, they would have competitions such as hanging people, how many you could hang. And they had human gallows who would lift up 2 prisoners like this, big 6-foot fellas. And that's the kind of thing that, this is not normal behaviour. This is what I'm trying to say to you. This is how dark it is. And I'm sorry to hit you with this. I know it sounds very negative now, but we will get somewhere better. But I'm just going to show you that, you know, it's just like the whole thing. You know, Carl Jung says we don't imagine beings of light by looking at airy-fairy things, but we're making the darkness conscious. And then when you know when the darkness is conscious, then you know where the good stuff is that you can help you. Same reason with the psychopath stuff. If you know who's a psychopath in your job, if it's your boss, you know how to avoid them and get with the decent people. So this is part 1. So we're going to have a break now. That's the intro so far. I hope you've learned some stuff so far about this place called Prussia, which has left an enormous heritage, shall we say, and not a very good one on the world. But we can still, the fact that we know about them is the fact that we will transcend them. And that's what we'll be talking about in the second half. So we're going to have a break now. So thank you very much. Yeah, that's an interesting thing as well that Mark is doing here, the symbolism that they use in the music industry and in films and stuff, because a lot of that comes from these people as well. So we were talking with a break to somebody there, and they were talking about like where the idea of blue bloods comes from. Some people talk about the rhesus negative blood, the high level of copper creates blue. Another one I've heard is the lower brainstem of a psychopath produces lots of a hormone called norepinephrine, which is a neurotransmitter actually, and under extreme states of stress, it's in the reptilian complex of the brain, and it's pure blue colour. And that's another theory. And another theory is that the flag of Prussia is blue. So this is why they're so big into symbolism, flags, regalia. And you think, well, that stuff isn't irrelevant and it isn't relevant anymore, but absolutely it is. It's just has changed. Back then it would have been, well, look at the symbolism they would place on something like an eagle. You know, say if you were in a French regiment and you were carrying the eagle standard, if you were a British soldier or a Prussian soldier and you captured that, you were like the David Beckham of your time. You know, it would be incredible. And it's because the symbolic power was, I'm going to be talking about this in a minute, was charged within that symbol. We think of, I used to be a graphic designer on Wall Street, and I can tell you for a fact, logos are not just something that looks pretty or interesting. There's a reason why they're all, I'm going a bit off tangent here, but this is why this stuff kind of ties in with what Mark Devlin's doing next time. There's a reason why those shapes are specifically picked, because they're charged. They're charged with a certain energy that affects us at our subconscious level. The main reason for it, we have triangles all the time, or 5-pointed stars, is because they're actually neurological form constants in the human brain called phosphines. And they actually exist in your brain. They're already in there, and nobody knows where they came from. A spiral is another one, there's a few of them. And if you look at so many symbols, there's a triangle as well, and a single eye. And you look at so many logos, they're those shapes, because someone a long time ago realized that those shapes affected human consciousness. And that's why flags are certain shapes and certain colors. And so it's still going on. They're not doing it with regalia so much these days. They're doing it with corporate logos and symbolism used in mass media and entertainment. What they call entertainment. Okay. This is 2014. It's the 200th anniversary of the Treaty of Paris, May 30th, 1814. It was the end of the war between France and the Sixth Coalition. The Sixth Coalition was the countries that were made up of fighting Napoleon, and that included Prussia and Great Britain. This happened after the Battle of Waterloo. Now, a lot of this came from the fact that the French Revolution, to a great extent, was kind of a good idea. because there was genuine Republican ideas that the monarchies were finished and the monarchies were over and we shouldn't have monarchies anymore, we should have republics. And Prussia went into decline during this period because all their crap wasn't working for them, treating their peasants terribly, treating their soldiers in the military terribly. While next door to them was France, which was a very confident, growing nation that was after the revolution, particularly Napoleon. You never hear about how Napoleon revolutionized, in the true sense, France with massive construction projects, roads. I mean, one of the reasons the English painter William Turner was able to get to Europe was because of all the roads that Napoleon and all the transport infrastructure that Napoleon developed, bridges and everything. And so these people, when Waterloo ended, all those French who fought for the revolution were all discarded in an instant because the Bourbon monarchy, the ones of Marie Antoinette and Louis V and XIV, were all reinstated. So the French Revolution was for nothing. All the royals were put back in. This was the main agenda on the table. Let's get the king back. Again, this is the priority they put in their bloodlines and in their royal titles. Now, but they learn things. Like all psychopathic systems, they learn things. When things go wrong, they destroy it, but they say, how can we do so it never happens again? And so the Treaty of Paris in 1814 opened up the way for well, Switzerland did exist, but it was a very different kind of place. It was really the unification of Switzerland, and later on the creation of Belgium. Now, these were sort of like business countries for the royals. The royals so much weren't openly running the money in their own countries. Now they shipped all their banks and all their administrative structures to these countries. When you think of Belgium, what do you think of? European Union. The country's only 180 years old or something. What else do you think of Belgium? NATO. Switzerland, head of the United Nations. World Bank, no, yeah. Geneva, these places are all big administrative centres. This is where they decided that if we took our money out of our country and our extravagant wealth and put them into places like Switzerland and Belgium and all our power, we won't look so much like the monsters that have it all. But they still have it all because they own the banks in these countries. Very devious, very sneaky, very tricky. And so that's really, and Switzerland is like, people think that Switzerland, chocolates and cuckoo clocks, it's the harmless 500 years of neutrality. Well, there's a reason for that. They don't want all the money in there to get damaged. This is why it was never any problem. Switzerland is a dark, dark country behind the scene. Nestle tries to put itself across the happy chocolate company, Meanwhile, the head of Nestle says that water isn't a human right. That's this lot again. Switzerland is where all the Templars' gold went. You hear all those romantic stories about the Templars taking the gold to Rennes-le-Chateau and up to Scotland and all this. No, it just went to Switzerland and it became banks. But they create all these romantic stories for people to go, oh, it's in Roslin Castle. No, it's not. It's in Zurich in a big bank block, and it's all the same families own it. So, open up the way for the creation of Belgium and Switzerland as administrative centres of aristocratic business, transnational and mercantile activities outside the framework of the royal decrees. By that time, the Holy Roman Empire had been abolished, more or less. Napoleon made a great comment about it. It wasn't holy, it wasn't Roman, and it certainly wasn't. No, it wasn't Roman, it wasn't an empire, and it certainly wasn't holy. And the Romano-Prussian elite really is what's in power. I recently read a book by a guy called Paul de Rossa called The Vicars of Christ, The Dark Secrets of the Papacy. Very good book. It's a good book because it was trashed by all the Catholic magazines. And he shows that the Venetian and the Roman black nobility, these are an aristocratic families in Italy, can become cardinals or top-ranking bishops without having served a single day as a priest. They're the same bloodline back to Babylon through the Roman Empire. And 100 years after this, they have what they call the Great War, which we're now celebrating, the 100th anniversary of that. You see, they don't think the way we do. They think in terms of centuries. and planning. This is why they look at the bloodlines. They're projecting who, in 100 years' time, who my nephew will marry. It's all laid out. And they do the same because they're fearful. Remember that film, the Gangs of New York, where Daniel Day-Lewis says, the only thing that keeps me alive is I have a fear that's so primal. I sleep with one eye open. That's how they live. And that's why they ensure that they will always have it. This illustration to celebrate the Treaty of Paris, again, I got some from some German book. It's very interesting. You have the goddess, again, what's a goddess doing on men of science? You have the star above it. You have the sun. The one I like is your man down here. He has the sword like this, and he's firing what looks like a lightning bolt at the older systems, and that's actually Lucifer. That's the Lucifer, the god of pure light, which is the god of the old Freemasonic orders. That's not Lucifer and the devil. It's not the same thing. It's a different thing. It represents purity of action. So they invoke the purity of Lucifer when they have to get something done. So it's purity. It's just business. It has no moral or ethical framework. It's action. It's a lightning bolt. A lightning bolt from the heavens doesn't have a kind of a moral win-lose thing before it strikes the ground. It just strikes. And that's what Lucifer is in the context of these people and these orders. And very similar to, it really comes out of the Hindu god Indra, who cracks the cloud cliff with his hammer, and that's Thor, Gunnar, and Donner in the Nordic thing. And so it's very interesting. The same archetypes show up, but they show this. I was talking about the graphics earlier on. You see it's in a pyramidal form, the composition. And the eye at the top is basically what's above the goddess, the star there. So it's always the same archetypes, the same design, same graphics always show up. They'll just do it in the form of painting. And so that's celebrating the Treaty of Paris. And of course, like any treaty, it didn't really work out. There's problems. But if you look at history, there is always a treaty that seems to take place in Paris, the city of light, city of Lucifer. It always takes place in Paris, and it's always to do with things like nuclear weapons, wars, endings of war, starts of wars, the Versailles Treaty at the end of World War I. And we're at 200 years from that, and they seem to have a major thing every 2014 in the beginning. And I believe what's happening in the Middle East right now is basically with this, what I think sounds like a fictional organisation, this ISIS bunch, that they're trying to justify something big again. Probably a military engagement to justify the existence of the European Union. And again, this was the same thing. The same trajectory. Now, these people they go right back to Babylon and how they come from. You can literally chase their family trees right back. Very easily, I might add. It's surprisingly easy how George Bush can be very easily traced back to a relative of the Queen, and then right back to Macedonia, and then you're only a few generations away from Babylon. Why does Babylon get such a bad rap? Well, Babylon was where agriculture was developed, and what they call civilization, which really means someone developed agriculture, became really good at it, took control of the food, and then took control of the population. And that's why they're so romantic about Babylon, because it was when an elite class finally had the power over the poor through the food supply, the irrigation systems. You see, the Babylonians were tremendous engineers. They were phenomenal for their time, but yet someone somewhere realized that could become a mechanism to control the people. We control the harvest. We can either make them starve or live. We'll sell them the grain. If we need more money, we'll invent this thing called inflation. All goes back to Babylon. Now, the Babylonians were also a very dark, and like the elements of monotheism that came out of there and so on is very, very dark as well. And they believed in, basically, they were a demon-worshipping cult. I know that sounds, or culture. They didn't have gods, they had demons. They were literally they had demons like the Catholics had saints. And that's probably the origin of all this obsession with Catholic saints, comes from the same idea. They had demons for everything, and they believed that demons came down in rain and lightning, and they fell and caused disease and problems, but they also granted favors and gave power. And they were brought down in the rain, and that's where gargoyles come from. That's why gargoyles were on the great European cathedrals. That's why they look like grotesque monsters, because they were resembling what was existing in Babylon, in that part of the world. If you went back to Sumer, you would have seen very similar statues as what's on Cologne Cathedral, or any cathedral, an old cathedral on these islands. It came from the thing, and that's why they channel water. Babylonian water demons. Now, this beast behind me is in the Phoenix Park in Dublin, very close to where I grew up. It's the largest obelisk in the world, in Europe. The one in Washington, D.C. is bigger. This is the second biggest one. This thing is immense. You can see by the people how big it is. It's a classic stepped pyramid, and this is Babylonian culture expressed through this Romano-Prussian bloodline. Because when I was a kid, I used to practice my football on that. I used to kick it up the steps, and it bounced back down, and you could run and catch it and try. It was a great way of practicing the ball coming back at you from any angle. And so you'll see at the central area there, just where you can see the top of the people, there's a frieze, a bronze sculpture. They're on all four sides, okay? And they're the scariest things you've ever seen. I used to be afraid. I used to be playing football there in the summer, kicking it up. And I used to swear those things were coming to life. They're big statues of battles, famous battles fought by the Duke of Wellington. The Duke of Wellington was actually Irish in that background, but that's where he was from. And they built this after Waterloo, after the Treaty of Paris, to celebrate their great military victories. Now, what's so creepy, I didn't notice as a child, apart from the fact that this thing has an energy to deliberately attract lightning, that's its purpose. It's built, of course, on a druidic site that was there, as they always are. But the four friezes around the outside are massive bronze sculptures of men being killed or being murdered at the Battle of Waterloo or the Peninsular Wars. They're actually cast from captured French cannons that were captured at the Battle of Waterloo. So they're and cannonballs. So they're infused at their kind of subatomic level with the death energy of that day. And that's why this monstrosity has this power. Now, why would they go to this trouble? We're not talking about symbolism here, we're talking about black magic. This is what we're talking about, it's black sorcery. They were celebrating all the death energy in these buildings and these structures, because it goes right back to the Babylonian water demon rituals. It was the same idea. And that's just their bloodline. And so that's, it didn't celebrate peace, it celebrated power. You always remember that. When they built these monuments, and like the Cenotaph in London, they don't celebrate peace, they celebrate power. Remember, World War II, I didn't end. An armistice was declared. I'll talk about that in a bit. An armistice is a very different thing. Now, this is I'm a satirist, I do stand-up comedian, I'm always looking through the old history of comedy and things like that. And I found this again in a German book. And this is the Prussians, the aristocrats, having a good laugh at what they've done. And this was from 1847. And that's significant, I'll explain in a second. You'll see the German guy here with the crucifix, so he represents the Catholic power structure in this Romano aspect. And he's sweeping all the bankers and all the Freemasons, that's what the cap is, into Switzerland. You're going down to Switzerland, you're going to run banks, you're going to do this. The French guy down here is pointing to a ship leaving. They're all their overseas interests in the Bahamas, because when the war ended, the French were given all kinds of concessions. They were given all kinds of different concessions. It wasn't like see, they put the king back in power, but he still needed colonies, so they gave them to him. So that's what that represents. And you have this guy here taking on the Bolsheviks and the Ottomans down there, and it shows the Prussian power. But the one that I find most interesting is up in the corner there. They show them, this is Britain up here. And they show them as kind of Romans, this guy, and that's Queen Elizabeth there. She's fretting over the death of her husband, Albert, right? And that's what that's about. But you can barely see it, but in the upper left-hand corner on Ireland are people who are like matchstick people, and they're begging with hats. 1847 was the year of the Irish famine. 1.5 million people starved to death, about 1 million died of that disease, and 2 or 3 million had to leave. And they're making fun of it. They're making, oh, isn't it funny? You know, we'll starve the Irish. We won't have to deal with them anymore. We'll move all the little banking scams and all the trades and all the Freemasons down to Switzerland so they can run that stuff. We'll give the King of France, the Bourbons, new powers in new colonies overseas. And this is how the idea of diplomacy came about. So when these fellas sit down at their Bilderberg meetings and their trilateral committee, they're talking about us exactly how, or they're feeling about us exactly how this satire portrays it. We're a joke. It's a big game. And we don't matter. It's all about their power, their structures, what suits them best. And they sit there pontificating about we've reached this kind of agreement and we've reached that. Really, it's the same grubby nastiness. Some countries will be destroyed. Syria will be destroyed. We've already destroyed Libya. Other countries will be invaded. Germany will have such power. We'll do something to encourage Scottish nationalism. Oh, this is how they do it. You know, this is the games they play. We'll flood Ireland with immigrants. We'll break up their strong culture. This kind of thing. This is what they do. And this cartoon from 1847 gives you that perfect insight into how they think. It's the grand chessboard. In fact, before I don't have the slide, I wish I did now, it's just popped in my head. They showed the Pope and the Kaiser Bill in another satire playing chess with Europe. And they were saying the papacy will have this part, and the Kaiser will have that part. And Britain and America is not even on the chessboard. See, what you have to remember is that the ones who have the real power, you don't normally hear about them. America's portrayed as a big, bad superpower right now. But anyone who knows anything about psychopaths, when they're doing this over here, you better look over there, because there's something else going on in the background. And it shows how the British Empire, even though it technically was the most powerful nation in the world this time, look who the big characters are. The Germans, the Prussians. You know, these are the big boys. And it's the same kind of thing. Now, some lady spoke to me at the break, and it was a brilliant point she brought up. She says, they're breaking up Scotland. The EU is breaking up Spain, Caledonia. Scotland gets its independence. Cornwall's going to want it. Catalonia in Spain is going to break away. And they're smashing up Europe into regions. What's the one country in Europe that has not been broken up? In fact, it's been unified. Germany. Well, the rest of us have all been demolished, and even, I can tell you, I live on the border of Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, on the Republic side, and when the Good Friday Agreement came in, they flooded that area with tons of money. You wanted a swimming pool, a community, anything you wanted, the money was just flying in from the EU. Roads were built, everything was just, so much money was spent. It was called a Partnership for Peace Agreement. But really what they were doing, they had a vested interest in keeping the border strong, because the idea was as long as the border remained, money kept flying in. So it didn't unify Ireland. It actually made it just, a financial gain to not have it unified. And but you look at it, what's the one country there's never any talk about it ever being broken up? Germany. Hidden in plain sight. Who controls the EU? Germany. Who are all the troikas who all came to Ireland to organise the IMF thing? Well, Germans. Who pushed that on top of Ireland? European Central Bank. Where's that? Frankfurt. Hidden in plain sight, and we've been all looking at Hollywood. We're all looking at we haven't seen, because we don't speak their language. And again, I'm not putting down German people. I'm talking about the elites, the aristocrats. Now, a Franco-Prussian War. Prior to this, this is becoming very relevant to the end of the... I've got some time up here. The Prussians decided after the Treaty of Paris that we can't be just treating our people like crap anymore. We can re-engineer them. We can change them. And the process became education. And what they basically idea was, the Prussians said, we'd be better equipped for wars, industry, and everything else if we turn people into robots. And this is where the German stereotype of we followed this process, and it does kind of exist, you know, because, I mean, I don't put Germans down, but I remember years ago, I was playing guitar at some hippie camp back in Ireland, and there was some song, I think it was like Lynyrd Skynyrd's Freebird or something, and the German guy was playing it exactly as it was in the songbook, and I says, yeah, that's kind of right, but that's not how it's played on the record. Let me show you how it's played in the record. And I played it, I was just playing the record, and he was like, no, I have read the process. I have read the process, and you have not followed the process according to the songbook. Now, where did that come from? The education system there made people into robots. And they also changed the language to Plattdeutsch, which was they took a new version of German and they exported all the German republics and other principalities to unify them, to take away the old Plattdeutsch, which was the old the old Saxon German, and they came up with a new language. And all these ideas we're seeing today about common purpose and reframing, paradigm, and all this stuff, the Germans were doing this 100 years, over 150 years ago in Germany. For instance, the education system, they had times tables, you know, 99 to 99, you know, that kind of thing. That's marching in your brain. 88 or 88, that's marching in your brain. And that's what you're square bashing in your brain. You're marching in your brain. So when the war comes along, you know exactly what to do, and by God did that pay off in the fruits in the 1871 Franco-Prussian War. The Prussians hammered the Bisto out of the French. I mean, it was an absolute decisive, massive military victory. And at the Battle of Sedan up here is an illustration of the German Kaiser riding through and all the dying Prussians going, oh, you know, we won, you know, that kind of thing. They even captured the French Emperor. That's how big the military victory at Sedan was. And the French generals were amazed by the Prussian troops. They referred to them as machine men. We were not fighting men, we were fighting machines. And of course, instead of like being disgusted by it, they say, how can we get a peace that action? And that's how the Prussian education model was exported to every major country from that point on. Marching in the brain, robots. This is the birth of transhumanism, the replacement of human beings with machines. This is where it began, the Prussian education system. And the Prussians were phenomenally disciplined, drilled. They weren't fearless. If the officer says, walk into that artillery, you do it, because you must obey the orders. And that's when they changed the Germans to the modern Germans we know today. And again, but they still hankered back to Babylon. This is the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin. It's very Babylonian, very Romano looking, and they light up at lights, and they understood the idea of the torchless procession, the procession of Isis through Babylon. At night, the Babylonians discovered that the people were more hypnotized if the effigies were lit up by night by fire, and the Germans were doing that. After the celebrated Battle of Sedan, and what happened 100 years later, well not 100, but 100 years later, was Nuremberg rallies, and that's where my work is bringing me now. And I've actually interviewed the nephew of the guy who was involved in the audio at the Nuremberg rallies, and they used to do things, put a low hum. They used to spend money on phenomenal audio systems, and then while the crowd of a couple of 100,000 was waiting, there'd be a hum, like that kind of thing, and it would slowly change in pitch, and people would become agitated, and then the Führer walks up, the hum would be switched off, and there'd be a release of adrenaline by the crowd. And this is still going on to this day. It's in pop music, they change pitches. This is where it comes from. the birth of transhumanism through the Prussian system. And we are so messed with, we have no idea. We are literally lab rats in a laboratory. It really is like that. And then 1914, George V of England said, find a good reason to go to war with Germany. He told that to his Foreign Secretary, Ed Ray, a few days before the Great War started, because there was massive unemployment about to happen in Europe because of the Federal Reserve plan the year before, transferred a lot of the capital from Europe to North America. Therefore, there wouldn't have been as much money to it in start-up businesses like mills, heavy factories. They wanted to build up America as a great industrial power. Europe, the new world, the old world, very, very ritualistic, that, Masonic. And so they had to whip up this great war in order to feed the beast, to cull the population. And they talked about it, they didn't hide it, and they deliberately antagonized Germany. They said Germany's a stupid country, there's nothing to show for itself, it's not a proper nation. So the average German is like, we'll show them, let's send us to war, we're ready for them. And as soon as they got into, the British were whipped up with patriotism, so were the poor French. But as soon as the slaughter started, they immediately said stop and made them bury holes in the ground as the trench warfare. And that was deliberately designed to make sure there was not a decisive outcome to World War I. And there wasn't a decisive outcome. There was an armistice declared. And this is my new book, Walpurgis Night, and it takes place, it really begins in this period, but I do throw back to some of the stuff I've talked about. There was a decisive period in Munich in 1919. It's just incredible. And what basically happened was they said, let's stop the fighting in World War I. It's just a pointless meat grinder. And everybody went home. And the Germans did not lose. They didn't expect to lose. And deliberately, at the Versailles Treaty, 100 years later again, in Paris, they can set a clock by these people. The Germans were told, specifically by the Americans and the French, that you must sign the surrender. You've been defeated. And Germany was officially blamed for starting, even though it wasn't their fault, and causing all the problems of World War I. It was now time to damage the Germans again. And you had humanity, you had the beginning of the IMF at this period. When I say a proto-IMF, the precursor, British, French and American banks, owned by the aristocrats and Swiss, made money loans to the German people. They called them humanitarian loans. They weren't. You had to pay them back with big-time interests. And it was deliberately done to humiliate the Germans and annoy them. But the reason why I call this book Walpurgis Night is because in Munich in 1919, and I have it described in my book, one of the most amazing events that ever happened in history that we know so little about happened. Walpurgis Night is a night when the witches take flight under Teutonic folklore and visit the Witch King in the mountain. Now, this happened in Munich, and I won't go too much into it because I could spend 3 hours talking about this event alone and what happened these days. But eventually, what really happened was after World War I, Germany was thrown into absolute chaos. And the Bolsheviks, again, who were very heavily connected to some very powerful figures in the West, tried to seize Germany, particularly Bavaria, and also Prussia, and also Berlin, and declare Soviets. And they did it in Berlin. They did it in Berlin with Rosa Luxemburg. It didn't last very long. And then it happened again later on in the year, in spring, in Munich. A Bavarian Soviet was declared by these Russians who came into the city and basically started ordering the Germans around. You're free now do this. And they were basically ran a reign of terror for a very short time. Now, in Bavaria, in Munich, as this was happening, a young soldier named Adolf Hitler was having a psychedelic experience in the nearby army hospital after he'd heard about the defeat of Germany. He was a normal guy, and something very strange was happening in Germany. A group called the Thule Combat League, Thule Society, were basically a magical paramilitary organization made up of aristocrats, German aristocrats, who were financing a kind of a paramilitary counter-insurgency to the Bolsheviks who were running Munich at that time. And this group, called the Prussian Free Corps, descended on the city in tandem with a group called the Thule Combat League. The Thule Combat League. At the head of them was Rudolf Hess, who I think is one of the most incredible figures in history, and you never hear much about him, and also Ernst Röhm, who also was the founder of the Blue Shirts. And they defeated the Munich Soviet in no time. It took off, and the Thulists, I mean, it's just an amazing story, but basically what happened was, you could read about it in the book, but there was a big thing in Germany at that time, and it has been brewing since the German unification under Bismarck, that something called the Freie Christus was going to come, the Germanic Christ, the warrior king, a new Charlemagne, who was going to come and save Germany in its darkest hour. And soon after, what happened was, on Walpurgis night, 1919, the Bolsheviks took a group of the Thule Society, including a prince and a countess, took them into a Munich gymnasium and shot them dead, including a Jewish college professor, with dum-dum bullets, which are basically make a body blow to pieces. It was a deliberate ritual. And this got out, this infuriated everyone, but it was designed deliberately that way. It came about on Walpurgis night, Beltane. We're talking about the high kind of like druidic stuff, because the Germans were now being switched because of the Protestant Reformation. The Presbyterian Germans, the Lutherans, were being very heavily encouraged to explore the occult in the years leading up to this. You had the Orders of the Templar, who invented the swastika. A guy called Lanz van Liebensveld, another aristocrat. He hoisted the swastika above his cult compound on the banks of the Danube, and invoked the stars as the sigils of Thor, the hammers of Thor in perpetual motion. This thing had all been planned years in advance to occulticize the German mindset. So when National Socialism came along, it happened. And when these two aristocrats were murdered, I'm not saying it's true, but the historical record says it's true. The Thulists had a seance in the Four Seasons Hotel, which was their operational headquarters in Munich, and the spirits of, in front of several witnesses, the spirits of the murdered countesses and the Prince Turn und Taxis appeared in the room, speaking Plattdeutsch, the language of old Germany, saying that the Freie Christus was about to appear. A couple of days later, Adolf Hitler walked in the door, out of nowhere. By September 11th, he was being told by his officer of the Bavarian Regiment, there's a very strange party meeting in a pub in the Tal in central Munich tomorrow night. I want you to infiltrate as a spy. He walked in there, and the Adolf Hitler of history was born. Germany is a gigantic experimental lab, not just for National Socialism, but also for the Bolsheviks at that time, but it was also in the years afterwards, since our unification was done, and all the growth of these German radical groups in the 60s and 70s, like Baden-Meinhof. The cultivation of the modern terrorists took place there. And so that's what's always been going on. So I could talk for hours about this stuff alone, but it's in the book if you want. I'll have to come back another time.
On the cover of the book,
Yeah.
top right, what is that symbol?
Oh yeah, very good. That symbol is the SS rune of death. It means end of life, termination of existence. Does it look familiar? Put a circle around it. What do you have? The Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. Yep. Well spotted. They're just messing with us all the time. The Lords of Perception, that's when it changed in towards when mass media, radio, cinema and everything came along. They started to change us using culture, pop culture. And this is the world we face today. Jimmy Savile is just someone I can't believe actually existed. I have a video on my website, my YouTube channel, Thomas Sheridan Arts, called Jimmy Savile, the 666 Killer. I'm absolutely convinced that he was involved in at least one of the Yorkshire Ripper killings. Irene Richardson, she was a prostitute that was found dead at the back of his apartment on Soldiers Field in Leeds. At least one. And he definitely was a suspect at the time. He was definitely known to the South Yorkshire police. And it's a big story in itself, but he was also very closely connected to royalty. And this is another thing we have to look at. Serial killers back in the 70s were the Osama bin Laden of their day. They were the ISIS of their day. They were used to put people in a state of fear. If you read books like Deliver Us from Evil, which is a very apt title, by David A. Yallop, he was an investigative journalist on the ground during the Ripper days, he shows that the people in Yorkshire were living in a state of war. The same thing happened to the son of Sam in New York around the same period. I lived in New York. I used to speak to women who were there as teenagers. They used to say they used to dress up as men so the son of Sam wouldn't kill them. It all went back to the Process Church, a cult operating out of Yonkers in New York, and right back to the CIA. They were using serial killers in the 70s as social engineering devices. In fact, in Yorkshire, they would play the alleged tape, which it was not Jimmy Savile. I don't know who it is. I know it's been attributed to some other guy. But he was involved in it. He was there on the ground. Margaret Thatcher went up there after the murder of one woman, calling, I'm sick of hearing about these wretched women. The cops there, according to David Yallop, were deliberately throwing the investigation into absolute chaos to protect a second killer, or someone who was of a very high profile and they didn't want to catch him. I've come to the conclusion it was Savile. If you go to my thomassheridanarts.com, you will see that I present quite good evidence for it. Now, that just shows you how dark we're dealing with. And this guy was also in with the royal family. Now, let me ask you a question. If you didn't know if you knew Jimmy Savile when you were a kid and you were an adult, would you allow him in your house? Would you want anything to do with him? He was creepy to me as a child. I can remember being afraid of him as a kid. And yet, the royals had him, and Margaret Thatcher had him staying at his house for something like 11 Christmases. And you wouldn't, if this guy was walking down the street and you didn't know him, he'd cross. And he was also quite big in Ireland, and he was very involved with a family called the Gouldings, who are aristocrats as well. They're a big they're a billionaire chemical, wealthy family in Ireland. They make fertilizers and things like that, industrial chemicals. He was a guest at their house. He was a regular guest in the Irish Parliament buildings. He stayed in the Prime Minister's house at the time as a friend of the family. He went to Israel. He had influence over the Israeli government. He was a fixer. That thing, Jim, he was fixer for the elites. He was also involved. They would have these high-profile, and it's been going on for years, of high-profile celebrities who go around passing messages and stuff between them. It's considered safe. Jimmy Savile is a prime example of the kind of people that this infection doesn't seem to have a problem with, but the rest of us wouldn't go near them. And this is the kind of world they've landed us in. Like, and I say it's dark. It's dark, it is. And you look at, you have a royal baby that's now coming about, that's been used as a huge psyop. I don't watch TV, I don't have one, but like when I was in Sylvia's house watching the news there, and they were talking about the royal family, and I was like, why is this even important? Why is it spoken about? Because it's the same idea that these royal people are so important to you. The baby is going to save the world. It's just a child, but it's going to save the world. We have ISIS. ISIS, is it real? I don't know. I really don't. But again, it's some kind of beheading cult, similar to what happened with the Frederick II and Van Katte. The idea that the beheading is going on, pushed in our faces, very similar to the French Revolution. Monsanto goes right back to Babylon, the idea of a selective elite controlling all the food. That's what Monsanto is. Feeding us and keeping us going. Transhumanism comes out of the Prussian idea, the machine men marching in the brain, who won the Franco-Prussian War, who later came up as the SS, the kind of idea of the German who just does it. Like the guy I said, that's not the process. That's not in the book. The idea, that's transhumanism. So you don't question anything, you're a robot. A robot who does exactly as you're told. Spawns out of that. The G4S. Have you ever looked at the G4S logo? Red, white and black. It's a Nazi flag. It's just been rearranged in a different way, but it's the same flag because certain colours have certain effects on your psychology. G4S is the security company that's basically taking over everything. It's actually operating as it's almost like a privatised Gestapo. Same kind of thing. The town that I live in Ireland, the G4S vans pick up the money. Because I'm in a border region, it's military sensitive because of distant republic, and so we still have military on the streets when money is brought into banks. Soldiers all over the town, and now they're guarding G4S trucks. So we have the military in Ireland now guarding G4S trucks, and it looks, when you see them all around it with their guns and the logo behind them, it's like private corporations are now becoming the new governments, the new entities. It's the same thing. It's continuing on. Goes right back to the Hessian guards of the Frankfurt Rothschilds. The same idea. Art again. The aristocrats are always changing our ideas of art. They're using art to mold us, art to change us. Again, although ultimately it all goes back to Babylon, the Prussians were very adept at that kind of thing. They knew very well about building sculptures, laying out cities like Karlsruhe in Germany, the Brandenburg. They knew about the idea of art changing people. Cultural Marxism, the other side of the 1919 PSYOP, the idea that we're never going to take over the world and control them through overtly being Marxist, but we can change them culturally. Political correctness. Political correctness is now you can't say anything. You just can't. And that comes from the idea of you cannot speak ill of the king. Ultimately, it'll go back to them. And religious mania is unfortunately horrible. How this is really getting me down. It's not only the growth of fundamental Islam, what happened in Israel with Gaza, that's bad enough alone. But you also have the Bible Belt in America. You have that kind of thing where these people have tremendous political power. Most of the Zionists in the world are American Christians, Protestants. They're not Jews, they're mostly American Protestants. You have the same, but you also have cults, and you also have I don't want to get myself in trouble, but you also have obscure religious organisations and groups that more people are joining up into. That's why I'm very dubious about the psychedelic thing. Again, that was all big in Germany in the 1800s. I talked about Lanz von Liebenfeld, the Orders of the Templars. Germans were deliberately occulticized for that reason, because when you're looking at when you're obsessed with the sky fairies in the sky, you're not watching what they're doing here on the ground. The same thing with the psychedelic kind of thing. If you're off tripping somewhere, do you really think your government are going to look after you while you're away? It's the same kind of idea. They were deliberately occulticizing us. And I don't care what you believe in. That's your own business. I'm just saying. And the Goldstein card, the idea that there's a fake revolution, there's a fake enemy out there, and we all have to live in fear of them. That all started in Germany too, and there was the idea there was Jesuits everywhere. The Jesuits were working alongside the aristocrats because they were ultimately going back to the black nobility of Rome. But the idea of the Jesuit in the shadows, we come back to the Guy Fawkes mask. I often find it amazing that these people in Anonymous don't see the irony that Guy Fawkes was a Jesuit and he wanted to burn down Parliament in order to create a kind of a weird kind of Catholic empire in England. It had nothing to do with freedom. And again, they're playing with us. They know these kinds of things. And this one for me, the glorifying of psychopaths. I was talking about psychopaths 5 years ago. No one was interested in them. Now Channel 4 are doing series of them on everything. And you have like the people like Professor Kevin Dutton saying, psychopaths are great. What would we do without them? They're wonderful. They're wonderful. And that comes in the idea again that the ones, when I talk about lucid, pure, whatever it takes to get business done, it's great. So the guy from Nestle, a German in Switzerland, the guy from Nestle, when he says water is not a human right, well, he's not a psychopath. He's a guy who gets things done. And this is what they're doing now, And that came out of like the idea Germany was taken down several times into the gutter. And then there was always talk of we need a hard man, a strong man to get things done and sort these people out. That's why we have to be very careful when they give us heroes and people to follow and people like that. We have to be very careful because that's often set up. So essentially, since the time Van Katte's head has been cut off, we're all living in Frederick II's nightmare. We're there. It's all come true. Germany is the default power in Europe. It is a growing world power. It's unified while the rest of all the European countries are being split into regions because it's easier for the EU to administer regions. The EU is becoming powerful. It's a German project. It's German, and if you look at the Merkel, they're all Prussians. If you look at all the powerful people in the world, Kissinger, German. So many of them. Bill Gates, his ancestry is German, and he's heavily tied up at Monsanto and everything else. All the movie people, Lucas, Spielberg, all German names. It just goes on and on and on. And both the big banking families, Goldsmith, and I think they're Berlin, and Rothschilds is Frankfurt. If you look behind it, it all goes back to Germany, but they never tell you. Now, do you remember I said about their marching in the brain and how the Prussian education system changed everything? Well, I think this is the most sinister development that's happened in the world since then. I don't know how many of you have heard of this thing called Common Core. But this is very heavily promoted by Bill Gates. Bill Gates is a remarkably sinister figure in all this. He's basically, they're making sense senseless. This is what they're trying, this is the new education system coming into America of how mathematics are now done. They say that the old way, it doesn't make any sense. So the new way gives you an estimated sum and a reasonable answer. This is extremely dark stuff. This is the new curriculum in American schools, and this is coming everywhere. I've seen common purpose documents that are doing the same in Ireland. Why are they doing this? Why are they raising children with new forms of mathematics, new forms of language? This is the roll of the dice. They're splitting the generations. So you'll have kids, by the time they're 12, will not be able to relate to their parents, and their parents won't be able to relate to them. They'll literally have a different neural and cognitive network because the school system has made them completely different, where the parents can't help them with their homework or anything like that. They're just getting people ready for a transhumanist future where you're basically a robot. And this is the parents will be left with tremendous frustration. I can't help my kid with this. And also to get rid of people in the schools, to drive out all good school teachers, and to make sure the only ones who stay in the schools are mindless robots who do exactly as the bureaucrats tell them. And all the decent school teachers who really care about the kids will just say to hell with it and throw their hands up in the air and walk out. This is so evil, folks. I want you to go home tonight and start studying Common Core and telling everyone about it, because it's coming here. It's coming everywhere. This is this split. This is not the first time it's happened. The first time it happened when they created the teenagers. The teenagers were deliberately created to create a split between them and their parents. Parents are all squares. They're authority. Don't trust the man. Don't trust your dad. Do what the man on TV tells you. Same again. So the kids, we're going to have a generation, well, that's if you allow it. That's why I'm a big proponent of homeschooling. We recently had our very first arrest of a mother in Ireland for homeschooling her child, even though under the Irish Constitution, homeschooling is totally legal and allowed, and specifically mentioned that parents have the right to educate their children at home. They deliberately, provocatively arrested a mother for the simple reason they're serving notice that this kind of thing is coming in. The state is always right. I mean, just look at that, you know. It takes 45 minutes now to do a sum because the kid, and if this is just madness, it's to split the generation. Bill Gates is like the child catcher in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, except he's doing it with stuff like this. He's stealing your children. Pied Piper of Hamelin. Where's Hamelin? Germany. Or Switzerland. I think it's Switzerland, Germany. That part of the world, Germanic-speaking world. The same idea. Someone will come into the town and take your children away from you. Well, they're taking them away in their minds, just common core. I want you to all go back now and really study that one. And this is just one example of other things that will just blow your mind. Okay, I actually believe it's an infection. These people are infected. My attitude is, but so what? I'm not. My life is not going to be like that. I'm glad I'm not a royal. I don't want to be one of them. I'm going to have a great time. I'm going to enjoy my life and all that stuff. And it is a great time to be alive. See, although my talk has been rather negative tonight, it is a great time to be alive because we are the first generation who can actually undermine them. And undermining is a term that used to come from when they would attack the castle and they would undermine the castle wall in order to tear it down. So in a technical sort of sense, we were the first generation in an intellectual sense who can undermine them because they made the mistake of giving us the internet. And just because you know the score doesn't mean you have to live in hopelessness. It's like when someone, when I was talking a lot with the psychopaths, people would say, Thomas, like, you just told me that the monsters run the world, or my boss is a monster. And I says, yeah, but now you know who the good guys are. Don't go with the monsters. And watch the show, but don't get involved. I don't get emotionally involved in anything political. I learned that in Ireland growing up. I was nearly killed by a bomb when I was 10. And you just don't get on the chessboard because you soon figure out, like I spoke about Batten, that the dodgy things about his assassination, the dodgy things about all this terror tactics, you don't get involved. You observe it. You be in this world, but you're not of this world. And I really do believe that we should all become living archives. It's the only reason I go out here and do this stuff is because I've discovered this stuff. I think it's amazing, and I say, well, why doesn't everyone else know this? That's the only reason I write the books and make the videos and do the films and do the talks I do. I just think this is really useful stuff to know. And we have if you really care about the word, the truth is a funny one because I kind of abide by the Friedrich Nietzsche idea that there's no such thing as absolute truth. There's only language, and all language is ultimately metaphor. And I think there's a lot of truth to that, but it's a good way to think about it. But it's like we should hold these things alive because one person's truth would be another person's lie. The aristocrats would probably just say, well, we know what's best for you lot. Bill Gates would go, oh, I know what's best for you. And maybe in some kind of crazy level, you just think he's some kind of living saint, I mean, I look at Bono all the time and think that I just say, what the hell is wrong with you, But I know people that know Bono, and he actually really does believe he's doing the right thing. He's just gone. He's gone the wrong way completely. But no one has told him. When you get that famous, nobody kicks the chair from out underneath you. So now this is a controversial one, and people this is another thing you have to learn. You have to get these things. There's two Illuminatis, right? And you hear, the Illuminati this, Illuminati this. The Bavarian, German, Illuminati under Weizsäcker, created by the Rothschild banking families. Frankfurt, ultimately hired as contractors by the princes of Frankfurt, Prussians, Germans. They tried to create a new reality back then by bringing in a new world according to mercantile things, and that was the idea of the Bavarian Illuminati. They were to transfer power from the old aristocratic families down to the new models running out of Switzerland and Belgium of corporations and America. Corporations, banks, City of London, Washington DC, Vatican, banks, presidents, but it was the same families, and that was the purpose of the Bavarian Illuminati. But there was an Illuminati before that, And they were the people who knew what the world was like before the great lies began. They were people who had read about the Gnostics, they knew about the Cathars. They were considered the whack jobs in their day, because they knew that the world was not exactly the way that the history had said it, that there was lots of they would have been the conspiracy theories of their day. They were the ones, and they were whispered about in hushed tones, and they terrified the elites. They mostly existed in Spain and Italy. And this is one of the great tragedies of the Bavarian Illuminati, because a lot of them migrated to the original Freemasonic lodges in Vienna and Paris, particularly the Grand Orient. And these were Freemasons who wanted to keep the spirit of the old Illuminati alive. And the reason why the Bavarian Illuminati was invented was so they could infiltrate these lodges. You can look all this up and damage them. In fact, I have a very good book at home on the history of witchcraft, and it goes into a section on the Bavarian Illuminati out of this, and it talks about the horrific damage that was done by the Bavarian Illuminati in destroying the mystical tradition of Europe, the real one. And so, when I say we're the real Illuminati, we're like the Gnostics and the Cathars and the Bogomils. We're the ones keeping the flame of truth alive for other people, and that makes you that doesn't mean you always are right or you're always are wrong, but you're always questioning the story, and you're carrying that inside you, and you always have to remember that one of the psyops they play is there's going to be a great big uprising of the people. It's going to happen one day, and they're not going to tear down. It's never going to happen. It's not going to happen. If it does, they planned it, just like all the other revolutions. Because what does revolution mean? Revolve right back to where you started. That's what revolution means. So that's where I am now. I'm enjoying my life. I'm having a great time. I'm meeting lots of people. But I know the future is bleak if you're in the system. But if you can get a way out of the system, start your own small business, whatever, homeschool your kids, grow your own food, and keep this knowledge alive, you'll never be affected by it. You're a dissident, a consciousness insurgent, as I called it. And the main one of all is laugh at these people. Do not allow you to think that they're monsters that have power over you. Satire, give it right back to them. Get pregnant for benefits. Outrageous, unemployed couple have second baby at taxpayers' expense. That's the way to do it. Because there's one thing I've learned, I'm not saying these people are psychopaths, but what the system is, one thing I've learned about psychopaths, they do not get irony and satire. They don't get it. They just don't. And this is the greatest weapon we have to undermine them. We all have to be like Bill Hicks and George Carlin, Richard Pryor, Wayne Rogers, going back much further. Even people like, I was even reading some stuff about George Formby. Even he had a kind of an interesting, kind of a subversive thing in his lyrics and stuff like that as well. Bernard Manning, for all the crap he gets, if you look at him now from the reflection of history, he was actually he was giving it up to the royals, and he could get away with it because he didn't care. And that's a tremendous power we all have. And that's the ultimate one, that is the ultimate path to freedom. Yeah, that's our freedom. They're crazy, they run the world. I don't give a shit. I'm too busy enjoying my life. And that's the whole thing, because once they get you in the fear zone, you're screwed. And that's basically it for tonight. So I told you I'd finish on a positive one, and it is a positive one. And it's the most positive message of all that you could ever actually have. And that's the message that you as an individual, you are in charge and not them. So thanks very much for that, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks very much. Oh, what's happening towards the end of this year? Yeah, I think there's something strange coming along, definitely. I've been looking at the financial markets lately, and that's always a good indicator, because they shot up before 9/11, and because these aristocrats, they like to move money around before they sell off their shares a week or two before, and the FTSE has been flying through the roof. It's actually gone to 3,000, I think. Money is moving very fast at the moment. Watch the flow of money. ISIS worries me. I think what ISIS has been developed as an excuse, a false flag thing, to have a go at Syria. Syria would be basically all the Middle East then under these people's control. I think they're looking for to create a kind of European Union in the Middle East, and I think the last one they're going to go for this year is Syria, and this is what the Arab League is about. And one of the things that did that for me recently was that they showed a Syrian Air Force base that was allegedly captured by ISIS, and they marched the fellas into the desert and all murdered them in their underpants. But if you look at those guys, they've all got long hair. No military service person has long hair and a big beard. So they were not on that Air Force base. They're just using this as an excuse to say that Syria has been taken over by ISIS, so is Iraq, and we can go in there and bomb them and take them over again. And I think the Americans will take a back seat this time. I think the European Union will try now to establish itself as a legitimate power through direct military engagement in the Middle East for the first time. You'll have the blue flag with the yellow stars on tanks and bombers and everything else in the next few years. And I think that's a big one. I think between now and you don't have to have a big explosion for it to be a false flag. You can do small things. You can do things incrementally. And is there going to be a big false flag this year? I don't know. I don't think they'll do that anymore. I think, again, that we will catch on to them all the time more and more. But what I think will happen is they will find some excuse to have a go at Syria. And I think European countries will be very heavily involved. And I think that's one of the reasons why the Obama was set up to be a deliberate disappointment, because he was whipped up as being the god or the one who was going to save the human race, and all the people now who supported him all think, they know he's a dud. So that was the idea, was to make America look bad. And if anything happens for the end of the year, it'll be European troops very heavily involved in the. What will spark it off? I don't know. But when money moves like that, something is going down. This lady was here.
When you were talking about the Common Core, I didn't understand the sum.
You're not supposed to.
How have the people in America, have they accepted that?
No,
they're.
Well, you see, unfortunately, you have a situation where a lot of people now, their kids are babysit by the television, they're babysit by the schools. They're not involved. They have faith in authority. And the ones who do care are desperately upset about it. But the main victims here, that PSYOP is although it's intergenerational splitting, the main target is school teachers. It's just to get decent, real school teachers out of the system and replace them with machine teachers. And eventually it'll be a robot or a computer in class. So yeah, no, it's like Americans are not very woken up that way. They seem to accept anything an authority figure tells them, because I'm not going on Americans, but they were talking about a society where they swear allegiance to the flag every morning in school. Authority is everything. So yeah, but it's taken over. It's done. It's a done deal. And it's not supposed to make sense, because you're extinct. That's what that's saying. You're the dinosaur.
So going back to the teaching thing, I'm an ex-teacher, and I noticed a very big difference between the kids before the bringing of the national curriculum in and local management of schools. Don't want to get too worried about this, but in about 92, 93, and other teachers said this the same in other schools, in another district, that the onset of computerised learning and games that the kids were being indoctrinated or taken over by in their evening, when they should have been doing homework or reading or whatever. There seemed to be a step down, a dumbing down that happened.
Yeah, definitely, and the destruction of creativity.
In the early 90s, and it happened about 93, 94. And I left in 2007, but it was down ever since then. And other teachers have said the same.
And if you ask anyone who's employed teenagers, they say that teenagers today are more obedient, but they're also useless. Definitely. You have to show them how to wash a dish.
If I mention stuff like this, and I sometimes go to college and do invigilation, talk about anything like this, I find that they understand a lot of what's going on, the Illuminati, the New World Order, but this so what? It's the life we have.
Oh yeah.
They don't rebel against it.
No.
I'm angry about it, but I don't get angry that upsets myself.
Well, that's the bureaucracy kind of thing. I just want to hang out here and collect my bloody pension. I don't need any grief.
Yeah.
And that also came out because the Prussians were the first ones to implement massive bureaucracy, because that's how the Germans solidified Germany, was because creating all these bureaucracies. And what's the EU? Nothing but bureaucracy. Hold out for your pension, just don't rock the boat, and everything will be fine.
The other thing, I saw a video today of two, I think they were definitely Israelis, they had Israeli name, being interviewed on television by a typical American presenter from the early 90s. We were talking about Mossad, and they said, well, we don't discuss Mossad between us. We don't write and say from one Mossad guy to another. We have another name for it. We call it ISIS, Israeli Secret Intelligence Service.
I mean, this could be dangerous.
So, and I find that they just literally playing this like violins, they're just rubbing their nose in it.
I mean, yeah. Well, who created the provisional IRA? What happened to the original IRA? What happened in 1969? That was created by the intelligence services in the UK and Ireland.
Yeah. Divide and rule.
Yeah, it's a dangerous thing for me to say over there, but that's if you look at the history, they create the beast, they create the monster, the Goldstein, to give you a false hope and to also make you afraid. Anyone else?
That's it. Last question.
Last one.
Is there any hope in Edward Snowden's revelations coming out and dishing the dirt on all the politicians? Because this is how the system works, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't trust the Snowden thing at all.
You don't?
I'll tell you why. One, he said nothing. What has he told us? Nothing. Nothing. Two, he's a Goldstein. He's the idea of Goldstein in 1984. He's created as a false hope. And this is the main reason I don't trust him, is because he looks like a guy on an IT help desk. He's the Che Guevara of the new generation. The Che, he doesn't look like a hippie with a beret who goes, right on, you know, he's one with a beard, looks like Jesus. He looks like a guy who's an IT help desk guy. So he is the counterculture radical poster boy, the Che Guevara, for the guy who works in the IT help desk. And that's, I don't even believe it's real. The whole story is ridiculous. The Russians, the beautiful Russian spy who wanted to marry him. You look at him, he looks like he should be on stage on TED talking about a new computer system. And that's deliberately picked because they're the ones you're talking about. They're all coming into college age now. And they're just robots who know how to do telemarketing. They've no creativity. This is why when you do an arts degree anymore, you don't have to know how to draw. That's all gone. You get your master's degree in art in fine arts now by having purple hair and being gay and things like that. It's all crap. So I'm not. You laugh, but that's what it is. That's what goes on.
Thomas, thanks, mate. That was fantastic.
Thanks everybody.